Montana Territory, 1876. Winter came early to the northern frontier, turning the golden prairie to silver under a pale November sun. At the edge of the young settlement of Clearwater, smoke curled from the chimney of the Antler Saloon, the only establishment offering warmth to weary souls caught between the civilized East and the wild unknown. Wade Sullivan tightened his coat against the bitter wind as he guided his horse down the main street. At 25, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to rely solely on himself. His lean frame and sun-bronzed features spoke of long days in the saddle, while his clear blue eyes remained watchful, missing nothing. A light stubble shadowed his strong jawline, the only concession to 3 days on the trail. "No sense in staying," Wade muttered to his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding that had been his only constant companion for the past 3 years. "Just long enough to resupply, then back to the high country." The words felt hollow even to his own ears. Winter was setting in, and the smart move would be to find work at one of the ranches until spring. But Wade had learned the hard way that attachments were luxuries a man couldn't afford out here. People died too easily on the frontier, from disease, from violence, from the land itself. His parents' graves back in Kansas had taught him that lesson. His brother's unmarked resting place somewhere in the Dakota Territory had confirmed it. The frontier demanded a man stand alone. That was the truth Wade had built his life around, the wisdom that kept him moving, kept him alive. The cold emptiness inside him matched the vast spaces he rode through, and he had made his peace with it. Or so he told himself. As he dismounted outside the general store, the clatter of a dropped crate drew his attention to the boardwalk. A young woman struggled to collect spilled goods while balancing a stack of parcels. Without thinking, Wade stepped forward to help, catching a tin of peaches before it rolled into the mud. "Thank you, sir," she said, looking up at him with the warmest brown eyes he'd ever seen. Sophia Addison, just 20 years old, had come to Montana to teach at the newly established schoolhouse 3 months earlier. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a practical bonnet, though a few tendrils had escaped to frame her heart-shaped face. The blue calico dress she wore was modest but well-fitted, with a woolen shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the cold. As their fingers brushed in the exchange of the tin, Wade felt something shift in the world around him. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable, but something in the way she faced him directly, neither coy nor fearful. Out here, where most women had learned to keep their eyes downcast around strangers, her forthright gaze was as startling as a lightning strike on clear day. "Glad to help, miss," Wade's voice trailed off, the invitation clear. "Addison, Sophia Addison, I'm the schoolteacher." She adjusted her parcels, studying him with unabashed curiosity. "You're new to Clearwater." It wasn't a question. In a town this small, any stranger was immediately noticed. "Just passing through," Wade replied automatically. "Name's Wade Sullivan." Something like disappointment flickered across her face, so briefly he might have imagined it. "Well, Mr. Sullivan, thank you for your assistance. Perhaps you'll stay long enough to enjoy our Thanksgiving celebration tomorrow. The whole settlement gathers at the church. It's quite nice, even for those just passing through." Before he could respond, a gust of wind snatched her bonnet. Wade caught it deftly, stepping closer to return it. As he did, he caught the scent of lavender and something else, books perhaps. It reminded him of the life he'd left behind, of his mother reading by lamplight while his father repaired harnesses by the fire. "I'm not much for celebrations, Miss Addison," he said, more gruffly than intended. She tied her bonnet securely, her eyes never leaving his. "That's a shame, Mr. Sullivan. Everyone needs warmth when winter comes." With those words, she gathered her packages and continued down the boardwalk, leaving Wade with an unsettled feeling in his chest. He watched her go, telling himself he was just being cautious about this stranger who looked at him like she could see past the walls he'd built. Like she could see the man he used to be, before the frontier taught him its harsh lessons about survival and solitude. That night in the small room he'd rented above the livery, Wade found himself unable to sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows with icy fingers, but it wasn't the cold keeping him awake. It was brown eyes and a voice that seemed to invite confidences he hadn't shared in years. "Fool," he muttered, staring at the ceiling. "3 days, supplies restocked, then back to your own business." But when morning came, Wade didn't ride out as planned. Instead, he found himself accepting work from the livery owner, who needed help breaking horses through the winter. Just until spring, Wade told himself, just long enough to build a stake for the journey north. He avoided thinking about brown eyes and lavender scent, about the schoolhouse at the edge of town, where Sophia Addison taught the children of settlers and ranchers alike. But in a settlement as small as Clearwater, avoidance proved impossible. The next afternoon found Wade repairing a broken wheel on the schoolhouse steps when classes let out. The children spilled into the yard, their excited voices carrying on the crisp air. Last to emerge was Sophia, looking surprised to find him there. "Mr. Sullivan, I thought you'd be gone by now." Wade kept his eyes on his work. "Livery needed help, figured I'd winter here." She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Well then, I suppose I'll see you at Thanksgiving dinner after all." "Ma'am, I don't," Wade began, but she cut him off. "Everyone is welcome, Mr. Sullivan, even those determined to remain strangers." With that, she walked away, leaving him with a half-repaired wheel and the uncomfortable feeling that she had seen right through him. The church was packed for Thanksgiving, every family in Clearwater crowded into the simple wooden structure. Wade stood at the back, hat in hand, fighting the urge to flee. He hadn't been in a church since his parents' funeral. Hadn't broken bread with others since his brother died. The press of people, the laughter, the sense of community, it all felt foreign now, dangerous even. These people didn't understand what he knew. That happiness was just the pause before the next tragedy. He was about to slip away when Sophia appeared beside him. "You came," she said softly. "Seems so," he replied, shifting uncomfortably. "Come sit with us," she offered, gesturing to where an older couple saved seats near the front. "My aunt and uncle would be pleased to meet you." Wade shook his head. "I'm fine here." Sophia studied him for a moment, then did something unexpected. She stayed, as the Reverend spoke of gratitude and community, as the food was blessed and shared. She remained beside Wade at the back of the church, occasionally glancing at him with a warmth that made his chest ache. Later, as the gathering moved to trestle tables set up in the church yard, Sophia introduced Wade to her aunt and uncle, Martha and Joseph Anderson, who had moved to Montana 5 years earlier to establish a small cattle ranch. They welcomed him without question, making room at their table as if he belonged there. "How do you find Clearwater, Mr. Sullivan?" Martha asked, passing him a plate heaped with food. Wade chose his words carefully. "It seems peaceful." Joseph laughed, a hearty sound. "Peaceful now, perhaps, but you should have seen it 3 years back. Rustlers, claimed jumpers, not to mention the winter of '73 that nearly wiped us out." "Yet you stayed," Wade observed. "Of course we stayed," Joseph said simply. "This is home." The word hung in the air between them. Home. A concept Wade had abandoned years ago, along with the hope of ever finding such a place again. As the evening drew on, Wade found himself watching Sophia. She moved among the townspeople with easy grace, equally comfortable with the rough-handed ranchers and the prim wives of merchants. When she sat with the children, telling them a story that had them wide-eyed and giggling, something long dormant stirred in Wade's heart. "She's something special, our Sophia," Martha said, following his gaze. "Came all the way from Boston after her parents passed. Said she wanted to make a difference somewhere it mattered." Wade nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The need to distance himself, to protect what remained of his heart, warred with an unexpected longing to know more about this woman who faced the harsh frontier with such open warmth. As the evening ended and families drifted homeward, Wade found himself walking Sophia and her relatives to their wagon. The night was clear, stars sprinkled across the vast Montana sky like diamond dust. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Sullivan," Sophia said as they reached the wagon. "I hope it wasn't too terrible an ordeal." The teasing note in her voice drew a reluctant smile from Wade. "Not terrible at all, Miss Addison." "Then perhaps you'll join us for Sunday dinner." Martha makes a roast that would tempt even the most determined loner. Wade hesitated, all his instincts warning him to refuse. But looking at Sophia in the starlight, her face flushed from the cold and her eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like hope, he found himself nodding. "I'd be honored," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. As they drove away, Wade stood in the empty street, wondering what had possessed him to accept. One dinner had already weakened his resolve to remain uninvolved. Sunday would only make it worse, yet he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that became increasingly familiar. Wade worked at the livery during the day, breaking horses and repairing tack. Sometimes he helped at the Anderson ranch, where Joseph was short-handed since his regular cowboys had moved on to Texas for better winter work. And increasingly, he found reasons to pass by the schoolhouse, often arriving just as classes ended. Sophia never seemed surprised to see him, as if she had expected him all along. Their conversations, initially brief and guarded on Wade's part, gradually lengthened. He learned she had studied at a women's college back east, that she had chosen Montana over more comfortable teaching positions, because she believed education mattered most where it was least available. "But it must be hard," Wade said one afternoon as they walked from the schoolhouse to the general store, "being so far from everything you knew." Sophia considered this, her breath frosting in the December air. "It was at first. But then I realized that what matters most isn't the where, but the why. I'm here because these children deserve the same chances as any others. That purpose makes the hardships worthwhile." Wade watched her profile, struck by her conviction. Most folks come west looking for something, land, gold, a fresh start. Not many come to give. "And you, Mr. Sullivan, what brought you west?" The question hit too close to the wounds he kept hidden. "Nothing worth telling, Miss Addison." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "I think there's a great deal worth telling about you, Wade Sullivan, when you're ready to share it." The use of his first name, so unexpected, left him momentarily speechless. By the time he recovered, they had reached the store, and the moment for confidences had passed. But that night, alone in his room, Wade found himself thinking about Sophia's words, about the possibility that his story, with all its loss and pain, might be something he could share someday. Not yet, the wounds were still too raw, the fear too ingrained, but someday, perhaps. As December deepened toward Christmas, Clearwater transformed. Evergreen boughs appeared in windows, red ribbons brightened doorways, and excitement built for the Christmas Eve gathering at the church. Wade observed these preparations with a mixture of nostalgia and dread. Christmas had once been his favorite time of year. Now it only reminded him of all he had lost. 2 days before Christmas, a blizzard descended on Clearwater with sudden fury. Wade was at the Anderson ranch when it hit, helping Joseph secure the livestock. By the time they finished, the snow was falling so heavily that the road back to town had disappeared. "You'll stay with us tonight," Martha insisted, hanging his snow-covered coat by the fire. "No sense risking your neck in that." Wade nodded his thanks, secretly relieved not to face the lonely room above the livery. The Andersons' home was modest but warm, filled with the comforts that spoke of permanence: braided rugs, well-worn furniture, shelves lined with books and mementos. It reminded him painfully of his childhood home, before the fever took his parents and scattered what remained of his family. Sophia emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of coffee cups. "The roads will be impassable by now," she said, handing Wade a steaming cup. "It seems you're our Christmas guest, Mr. Sullivan." Their fingers touched in the exchange, and Wade felt that now familiar jolt of awareness. In the firelight, Sophia's chestnut hair gleamed with copper highlights, and her eyes held a warmth that reached past his defenses. "I appreciate your hospitality," he said formally, fighting the urge to hold her hand a moment longer than necessary. Later, as Martha and Joseph retired for the night, Wade found himself alone with Sophia by the fire. Outside, the wind howled, driving snow against the windows, but inside was all warmth and quiet companionship. "Will you tell me now?" Sophia asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "What brought you west? What keeps you moving from place to place?" Wade stared into the flames, considering deflection as he always had before. But something about the storm raging outside while they sat safe within, about the woman beside him who looked at him as if what he might say mattered deeply to her, loosened the tight control he kept over his past. "I came west because there was nothing left for me back east," he began slowly. "My parents died of fever when I was 19. My younger brother, Thomas, and I decided to try our luck in the territories. We heard there was land for the taking, opportunities for men willing to work hard." He paused, the memories rising like ghosts. "We were so young, so sure we'd find our fortune. Instead, we found how hard the frontier can be on those who don't understand its rules." "What happened?" Sophia asked, her voice gentle. Wade's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Thomas got involved with some men in Dakota Territory, rough types, running horses of questionable ownership across the border. I tried to warn him, but he was just 17, thought he was invincible." He took a ragged breath. "One night a posse caught up with them. Thomas was shot, died in my arms out there in the middle of nowhere." Sophia's hand covered his, her touch anchoring him as the painful memories threatened to overwhelm him. "I'm so sorry, Wade," she whispered. "After that I kept moving. Worked ranches, drove cattle, broke horses, whatever kept me busy enough not to think too much. Learned that getting attached just means more to lose when things go wrong." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "And things always go wrong out here, Sophia. The frontier doesn't forgive mistakes." She held his gaze steadily. "Neither does it punish everyone forever, Wade. Loss is part of life everywhere, not just here. The question is whether we let it define us." "Easy to say when you've got family, purpose, a place to belong," Wade countered. "I lost both my parents within a month of each other," Sophia said quietly. "Influenza. I was 18 and suddenly alone in the world. I could have stayed in Boston, taken the safe path, married a suitable man from my father's circle of friends. Instead, I chose to come here because I refused to let grief determine my future." Wade stared at her, seeing her resilience in a new light. "You're a remarkable woman, Sophia Addison." She smiled, the firelight catching the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "And you're a good man who's been carrying his brother's death like a personal failure for too long." "It wasn't your fault, Wade." The word struck him like a physical blow, addressing the guilt he'd carried but never acknowledged aloud. Before he could respond, a tremendous crash sounded outside, followed by the terrified neighing of horses. Wade was on his feet instantly, reaching for his coat. The barn roof must have collapsed under the snow. Joseph appeared from the bedroom, pulling on his boots. "The stock." "I'll check," Wade said, already heading for the door. "Stay here where it's warm." Outside, the storm's fury was disorienting. Wade fought his way through snow up to his knees, the wind cutting through his coat like a knife. The barn loomed ahead, one section of the roof indeed caved in under the weight of wet snow. Inside, the horses whinnied in panic, some still in their stalls, others loose and dangerously frightened. Wade worked quickly, securing the loose animals first, then checking each stall for injuries. He was leading the last horse to a safer section when he heard a cry from outside. Sophia stood in the barn doorway, snow coating her shawl and hair. "Wade, Joseph says the creek's rising. The ice dam must have broken upstream. We need to move to higher ground." Wade cursed under his breath. Flash floods in winter were among the deadliest threats in the territory, especially when they came at night during a storm. "Get back to the house. Tell Joseph to hitch the wagon. I'll secure these horses and be right behind you." She hesitated, clearly torn between returning to safety and helping him. "Go, Sophia, now." Something in his voice convinced her. She disappeared back into the swirling snow, leaving Wade to work faster. He had just finished when Joseph appeared with a lantern. "Wagons ready. Martha's packing essentials. Creek's already over its banks. We've got minutes, not hours." Together they worked to save what stock they could, leading the most valuable horses and the milk cow to higher ground near the wagon path. By the time they returned to the house, water was already seeping around the foundation. Martha had packed quickly and efficiently: food, blankets, essential documents. Sophia stood ready with her own small bag and a box of school books she wouldn't leave behind. The four of them piled into the wagon, Joseph taking the reins while Wade mounted his buckskin to ride alongside. They weren't the only ones fleeing. Other ranchers from the lower valley were on the move, families huddled in wagons, men on horseback driving cattle toward the ridge that overlooked the settlement. The blizzard made progress agonizingly slow, the horses struggling through deepening snow while the sound of rushing water grew louder behind them. Wade rode back and forth, checking the rising water, urging Joseph to greater speed. They were halfway up the ridge when one wagon wheel caught in a hidden washout. The wagon tilted dangerously, nearly toppling. "Jump," Wade shouted, guiding his horse alongside. Joseph and Martha made it clear, but Sophia was trapped on the high side, the wagon shifting beneath her. Without hesitation, Wade spurred his horse closer and held out his arm. "Trust me," he called over the storm's roar. Sophia's eyes met his, and in that moment of perfect understanding, she jumped. Wade caught her around the waist, pulling her onto his horse in front of him. Her body pressed against his chest, warm and alive despite the cold and danger surrounding them. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair, arms tightening protectively around her. "You're safe." The wagon toppled moments later, carried away by the rising flood. Joseph watched it go with stoic resignation, his arm around Martha's shoulders. "Everything we built," Martha said softly. "We're alive," Joseph replied firmly. "That's what matters." The group continued to higher ground, joining other families at the church, which stood on the highest point in Clearwater. Throughout that long Christmas Eve, they huddled together as the storm raged and the flood waters rose, claiming homes and livelihoods in the valley below. Wade never left Sophia's side, his earlier reserve forgotten in the face of what might have been lost. When she shivered, he wrapped his coat around her shoulders. When fear shadowed her eyes as she watched the destruction below, he took her hand, offering silent strength. "Thank you," she whispered as dawn finally broke on Christmas Day, revealing the extent of the damage. The flood had spared the town itself, but many of the outlying ranches had been damaged or destroyed. The Anderson place was among the worst hit, with only the upper story of the house still visible above the receding waters. "For what?" Wade asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "For being here, for helping us, for—" She hesitated, then continued more softly, "for showing me the man behind the walls you've built." Wade looked down at their still joined hands. "I'm not sure that man exists anymore, Sophia. I've been running so long I don't know how to stay." "Then perhaps it's time to find out," she said simply. As the community gathered in the church for an improvised Christmas service, Wade found himself at a crossroads. The flood had washed away more than buildings and fences. It had swept away his illusions of safety through isolation. Sitting beside Sophia, surrounded by people who had faced disaster together and now turned to the work of rebuilding without question, he recognized the hollow emptiness of his solitary existence. In the days that followed, Clearwater revealed its true character. Families who had been spared took in those who had lost everything. Men organized work parties to salvage what could be saved and rebuild what couldn't. Women coordinated supplies, ensuring no one went hungry or cold despite the losses. Wade threw himself into the recovery efforts, working from dawn till dusk alongside Joseph and other ranchers. The physical labor was familiar, but the purpose behind it was new, not just survival but restoration, not just endurance but hope. 2 weeks after the flood, Wade stood with Joseph surveying the Anderson ranch. The barn was a total loss, the house badly damaged but salvageable. Most of the stock had survived, thanks to their quick action that night. "We'll rebuild," Joseph said, his face lined with fatigue but his voice steady. "Start with the barn, then repair the house. By spring, we'll be ready to increase the herd." Wade nodded, admiring the older man's resilience. "It's good land, worth the effort." Joseph gave him a considering look. "It's more than I can manage alone. Even with hired hands, it's a two-man operation at minimum." "I've been thinking on it, Wade. You've got a way with horses few men do. You know cattle. You work harder than men 10 years younger." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm offering you a partnership. Help me rebuild, run the place with me. Eventually it would pass to you. The offer stunned Wade into silence. He had worked dozens of ranches over the years, but never with the prospect of ownership, of permanence. The responsibility both tempted and terrified him. "That's generous," he said finally, "but what about Sophia? Doesn't she stand to inherit?" Joseph smiled slightly. "Sophia has her teaching and her own dreams. Besides, this offer doesn't preclude other arrangements that might develop naturally." The implication was clear, and Wade felt heat rise in his face. "I'll think on it," he promised. That evening he found Sophia at the schoolhouse, which had been spared by the flood and now served as temporary housing for several displaced families. She was reading to a group of children, her animated voice bringing the story to life despite the cramped conditions and lingering anxiety. Wade waited until the story ended and the children dispersed to their families before approaching her. "You're good with them," he said. "They need that stability right now." Sophia closed her book, smiling up at him. "Children are remarkably resilient. They remind me that new beginnings are possible, no matter the circumstances." "Your uncle offered me a partnership today," Wade said abruptly. "Wants me to help rebuild the ranch, run it with him." Sophia's eyes widened. "That's wonderful. What did you say?" "That I'd think about it." Wade ran a hand through his hair, struggling to articulate the conflict within him. "It's been a long time since I stayed anywhere, Sophia, since I let myself believe in a future in one place with people who might matter too much." Understanding softened her expression. "And that frightens you." "Yes," he admitted, the simple truth a relief to speak aloud. Sophia stood, moving closer until barely a handspan separated them. "What frightens you more, Wade? Staying and risking loss again? Or leaving and guaranteeing it?" The question struck at the heart of his dilemma. Wade looked down at this remarkable woman who had somehow slipped past his defenses, who saw him more clearly than anyone had in years, and felt certainty crystallize within him. "Leaving," he said hoarsely, "leaving frightens me more." Her smile bloomed slowly like the first wildflowers after winter. "Then stay, Wade Sullivan, stay and find out what might grow here." Without conscious decision, Wade reached for her hands, enfolding them in his own. "If I stay, Sophia, it wouldn't just be for the ranch. You should know that." "I do know that," she replied softly. Wade took a deep breath, gathering courage for words he'd never expected to speak again. "I'm not a whole man. There are parts of me that may always be broken by what I've seen, what I've lost. But if you're willing to accept that too, to help me find my way back to living instead of just surviving, then I'd like to court you properly." Sophia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I would like that very much," she whispered. Over the following months, as winter gradually yielded to spring, Wade discovered what it meant to build rather than flee. The work was backbreaking, clearing debris, rebuilding fences, constructing a new barn, repairing the house. But each completed task represented a step toward a future he increasingly allowed himself to imagine. His courtship of Sophia progressed with similar care and deliberation. Sunday dinners became a tradition, then escorting her to and from school, then lingering walks along the ridge overlooking the valley when weather permitted. They talked about everything: her childhood in Boston, his early years in Kansas, books she loved, horses he had known. Gradually, Wade shared more of the darkness he had carried. The guilt over Thomas, the fear that had driven him all these years, the loneliness he had mistaken for independence. Sophia listened without judgment, offering not pity but understanding. And in return she shared her own fears, that she had run from grief by coming west, that her teaching made less difference than she had hoped, that despite her brave words, she sometimes felt overwhelmingly alone. By late April, as the first green touched the valley and calving season began in earnest, Wade knew with unshakable certainty that he had found what he never thought to seek again: a home, a purpose, and a love that made both meaningful. On a clear Sunday afternoon, with the ranch beginning to show signs of recovery and new life, Wade asked Sophia to walk with him to the ridge. The view spread before them, the valley greening, the distant mountains still snow-capped, the town of Clearwater growing with new construction. "I remember the first day I rode into town," Wade said, taking Sophia's hand. I was so determined to remain apart, to pass through without connection. Then a schoolteacher dropped a tin of peaches and everything changed. Sophia smiled at the memory. You looked so reluctant to help, yet you did it anyway. That's when I knew there was more to Wade Sullivan than the loner he pretended to be. Wade turned to face her fully, his heart pounding. You saw me when I didn't want to be seen. You offered warmth when I had convinced myself cold was safer. He took a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. This was my mother's. I've carried it all these years, the one thing I couldn't bear to part with. I'd be honored if you would wear it, Sophia Addison, as my wife. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to Wade's face. Are you certain? About staying, about building a life here. The only thing I'm more certain of is that I love you, Wade said, the words that had once seemed impossible now the simplest truth he knew. I love your courage, your kindness, your faith in what can be rather than fear of what might happen. You've taught me that loss isn't the end of the story, it's just part of it. Yes, Sophia whispered, holding out her trembling hand. Yes, I will marry you, Wade Sullivan. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Wade felt the last of his walls crumble. Here, on this ridge overlooking land he would help cultivate, with this woman who had shown him the way back to life, he was no longer just surviving. He was home. They were married in the church on the first day of June, with Joseph standing as Wade's best man and Martha beaming from the front pew. The entire settlement turned out for the celebration that followed, the community that had weathered flood and blizzard together, now rejoicing in this new beginning. That night, as Wade carried his bride across the threshold of the newly repaired ranch house, their home now, with Joseph and Martha moved into the comfortable new cabin nearby, he paused to look into Sophia's eyes. Happy? He asked softly. She reached up to touch his face, her expression luminous with love. Happier than I ever imagined possible. And you? Wade thought about the long journey that had brought him to this moment, the losses that had shaped him, the solitude he had chosen, the chance encounter that had changed everything. He thought about Thomas, who would have liked this spirited schoolteacher, who would have wanted his brother to find joy again. I spent so many years believing the frontier was no place for love, Wade said, holding Sophia close. That attachment was a weakness I couldn't afford. I was wrong, Sophia. Love isn't a luxury out here, it's a necessity, as essential as water, as vital as shelter. He kissed her gently. You are my home, my heart, my future. Yes, I am happy beyond words. As the last light of day faded and the first stars appeared over Montana territory, Wade Sullivan held his wife in his arms and gave thanks for second chances, for resilience, for the courage to begin again. The frontier had taught him its harshest lessons about loss, but Sophia had taught him an even more powerful truth, that even in the wildest places, even after the coldest winters, warmth returns, and with it, life renewed.